Alexander III of Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great, became king at the age of 20, and by the time of his untimely death at the age of 32, he had conquered the majority of the known world. Alexander was known as the Great. During his brief but eventful reign, he established a large empire that reached all the way from Greece and Egypt to India. This empire encompassed the whole Indian subcontinent. In spite of this, the youthful ruler's hopes of future conquest were dashed when he passed away suddenly in Babylon in the year 323 BCE. After the death of the conqueror, his descendants continued to fight among themselves, which ultimately led to the collapse of their massive empire. In spite of this, Alexander's legacy lives on in the form of the Hellenistic world, which has had a significant impact on practically every country and culture up to the present day. His life, his rule, and the legacy he left behind are all well documented. However, there is always more information to uncover. Alexander the Great was a legendary monarch, general, and conqueror. The following are 8 facts that are not often known about him. Alexander the Great was a member of an ancient dynasty. The name Alexander the Great is well known throughout the world. Alexander III of Macedon was the name that the young king went by before he became renowned throughout history as the Great. However, very few people are aware of this fact. Alexander the Great was the son of King Philip II of Macedon and Olympias, who was Philip's 4th wife. Alexander was born in 356 BCE. Philip was a member of the old Argead dynasty, which could trace its roots back to a fabled time in ancient Greece. This dynasty was the ancestor of the Argead family. The first monarch of the dynasty, Coronis, was said to have been a Heraclean descendant, at least according to the oral history. Olympias was a part of the ancient royal family of Macedonia, despite the fact that she was not a Macedonian herself. Alexander's mother was a Molossian, an ancient Greek tribe that originated in Epirus. Her father was the king of the Molossians. The distinguished lineage of Olympias continued on from there. Her family believed that they were related to none other than the mythical Achilles, who was a hero from the Trojan War. As a result, Alexander was able to trace his ancestry back to some of the most well-known individuals from Greek history and mythology. It is not surprising that the young prince had the feeling that he was destined for greatness. Alexander's father paved the way for his military success. Although his son's legacy now overshadows his name, King Philip II of Macedon lay the basis for the army that would help Alexander conquer the known world. This army would help Alexander win the conquest of the known world. During Philip's rule, Macedonia went from being a minor kingdom to becoming a major political and military force, eventually becoming the dominant state in ancient Greece. Philip II employed diplomacy, marital alliances, and most crucially, he restructured the army, making it the most lethal military force of the time period in order to accomplish such a feat. He was successful in all of these endeavors. The phalanx was an infantry formation that was considered to be the backbone of the Macedonian armed forces. It was a block of troops packed tightly together, and each man in the formation carried a sarissa, which was a type of pike of between 4 and 6.5 meters, 21 feet, in length. The Macedonian infantry's usage of the sarissa, which was roughly twice as long as the pikes that the Greeks employed, provided an advantage in terms of reach before the pike blades of the opposing force could reach them. The cavalry, which was another one of Philip's creations, went on the offensive while the phalanx was used to defend against enemy troops. One of the first shock cavalry formations in the annals of military history was the companion cavalry, which consisted of elite mounted men that were organized by the aristocracy of Macedonia. Aristotle was his tutor. The skill of battle was not the only thing that Philip passed on to his son. Alexander received an excellent education as a prince of Macedonia, one that included instruction in history, philosophy, literature, algebra, and a variety of other significant disciplines. The most intelligent people of the day were brought to the royal court at Pella, which is located in modern-day Greece, so that they might educate the future conqueror. Aristotle, the renowned philosopher, was one of those who participated. At that time, Aristotle was known primarily as Plato's pupil, despite the fact that he had not yet established a name for himself. As a result, Philip II extended an invitation to Aristotle to instruct his son, telling the philosopher that he would reconstruct his home at Stagira. Young Alexander was exposed to the teachings of Aristotle for a period of 3 years, during which time he developed an insatiable curiosity in philosophical topics. Diogenes the Cynic was an ascetic philosopher who was known for his rejection of earthly belongings and for sleeping in a big clay jar. According to a narrative, Alexander the Great encountered Diogenes the Cynic when he was still a young prince. Alexander inquired to the philosopher about whether or not there was anything that could be done to assist him. The reply from Diogenes was, "Yes," and he said, "Stand away, you're preventing the sun from reaching me." It would appear that Alexander was left with such a profound effect by the encounter that he was afterwards reported as declaring, "If I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes." Alexander's interest in philosophical topics remained strong throughout his life. During his time in India, he took a break from the war to engage in extended conversations with the naked philosophers of the Hindu and Jain religions. These individuals, like Diogenes, eschewed human vanity as well as clothing. Alexander's favorite book was the Iliad. It should not come as a shock that Alexander the Great was a voracious reader of the great classics given his distinguished ancestry and high level of education. His favorite works by Homer were the Iliad and the Odyssey. He read them over and over again. According to the Greek biographer Plutarch, who lived in the 1st century BC, Alexander the Great always had a copy of the Iliad with him that had been annotated by his teacher Aristotle. According to Plutarch, Alexander the Great regarded the Iliad as the perfect portable treasure of all military virtue and knowledge. It is said that Alexander the Great kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow as he slept. Achilles, the great warrior, was his most admired historical figure. After all, Achilles was one of his maternal ancestors, and he descended from that side of the family. And just like Alexander the Great, his childhood hero, Alexander would lead the Greeks into battle against the Easterners. Alexander, in contrast to Achilles, who was killed during the Trojan War, would emerge victorious, bringing down one of the most powerful empires in the East and establishing a brand new and mighty dominion. Alexander the Great adored his faithful steed, Bucephalus. A well-known tale of romantic feelings shared by humans and animals is included in Plutarch's biography of Alexander the Great. When Alexander was 10 years old, his father was presented with the opportunity to purchase a wonderful and huge horse. However, no amount of training could get the animal to submit. Philip was frustrated by his intransigence, so he gave the order to have the young horse removed. Alexander, however, was taken aback by the animal's beauty and decided to step in, placing a wager that he was capable of mounting the ferocious beast. The prince is credited with having successfully tamed the stallion after realizing that the horse was terrified of its own shadow. In the end, Alexander decided to keep the horse, and he gave it the name Bucephalus, or Bucephalus, which means ox head. The pair eventually became inseparable, and when Alexander set out on his famed campaign against Persia, he selected Bucephalus to serve as his battle horse. During Alexander the Great's journey to the end of the world as it was understood, Bucephalus fought with his master in many of the battles they fought. The long journey that Bucephalus had been on came to a conclusion in the distant land of India. After the War of Hydaspes in approximately 326 BCE, Bucephalus passed away from wounds sustained in the war, or possibly from old age. Alexander's beloved steed was 30 years old at the time of his death. Alexander the Great established a city on the banks of the Hydaspes River and gave it the name Alexandria Bucephala in recognition of his loyal companion. His ascent to the throne was a violent affair. Philip II was murdered in the year 336 BCE by one of his bodyguards, who was then killed while attempting to flee the scene of the crime. Alexander, who was just 20 years old at the time, was hailed as the new ruler by the aristocracy and the soldiers not long after the previous king passed away. However, there were many who cast doubt on his assertion, and to make matters even more perplexing, some people suspected both Alexander and his mother Olympias of having a hand in the murder of Philip. After all, Philip and Olympias's relationship has deteriorated significantly over the past few years, to the point where Olympias and her son have been banished from the realm. Alexander, however, did not waste any time once he realized that the throne was suddenly open, and he moved swiftly to remove any and all potential challenges to his rule. Alexander the Great gave the order to execute his cousin, as well as 2 princesses of Macedonia and other members of the royal family who he regarded as his competitors. In addition to the cleansing that took place at the court, Alexander had to cope with many Greek city-states that had taken advantage of the death of Philip in order to revolt. The new king put an end to the uprising with a rapid and bloody campaign, which resulted in the rebel leaders being severely punished and the establishment of law and order. Alexander the Great was able to launch his legendary campaign in Persia after Greece was successfully brought under control. Alexander was never defeated in battle. The majority of Alexander the Great's reign was spent on the battlefield, whether it be against Greek city-states, Thracian tribes, or the armies of Persian and Indian monarchs. Alexander the Great used the phalanx formation and companion cavalry extensively throughout his many victories, which contributed to the growth of his army into the most formidable military force of the time period. The military methods and tactics that Alexander employed are being taught today at some of the most famous military colleges in the world. After all, Alexander the Great was victorious in every single battle he fought in throughout his 15 years of military service. Why? Alexander the Great was a man who, in addition to learning the art of combat from a young age, possessed enormous personal charisma and fearlessness, along with exceptional leadership skills. The morale of the army was boosted by his consistent presence among his soldiers, and their resolve to fight was strengthened as a result. However, the young conqueror's practice of personally leading the army resulted in a number of dangerous situations in which he came dangerously close to losing his life and many more injuries. At the Granicus River, for instance, Alexander miraculously cheated death after Cletus the Black saved his life from the Persian attacker in the very last second. This allowed Alexander to escape the river without being killed. During the Indian campaign, however, Alexander suffered the most serious injury of his life when an enemy arrow punctured his lung. He named many cities after himself, and one after his horse. Alexander the Great was not merely a military conqueror. In addition to that, he was a constructor and a founder of cities. During his 10-year drive in the east, he was responsible for the establishment of more than 70 new cities. It should come as no surprise that the young conqueror chose to name all of them after himself, with the exception of the one in India, which he called after his most cherished horse, Bucephalus. Alexander's towns marked the route that his soldiers took as they advanced into the regions that are now Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, respectively. Pakistan is also included in this itinerary. The most of them are now nothing more than ruins, or they have been rebuilt on top of them to create modern cities. The metropolis that Alexander the Great established in Egypt is unquestionably the most well-known of them all. It was intended for Alexandria ad Egyptum to serve as the imperial capital of his realm. But fate did not have it that way. After Alexander's death in Babylon, his successors, known as the Diadochi, immediately began fighting one another, which led to the rapid decline and fall of the empire. Despite this, Alexandria ad Egyptum continued to serve as the capital of the powerful Ptolemaic kingdom, one of the numerous Hellenistic kingdoms that were established in the wake of the brutal conflicts. Alexandria outlived the rule of the Ptolemies and continued to serve as the intellectual and commercial hub of Roman Egypt. Only throughout the Middle Ages did the location become less significant in history. Nevertheless, Alexander's city saw a renaissance in the 19th century, and as a result, it is now the second largest city in Egypt and one of the most important hubs in the Mediterranean. We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.